My name is Nancy Ashford. I'm 34 years old, a senior researcher in biotech living just outside Boston. And until last month, I thought the file on my childhood was closed. I thought the ink was dry. I thought the wounds had scarred over enough that I could stop reopening them in my mind at random hours of the night. I was wrong. The past doesn't die. It just waits until you're finally successful enough to be worth haunting. I was standing in my lab watching a centrifuge spin down, half listening to the hum of machinery when security called my extension. There was a process server in the lobby asking for me by name. That alone wasn't unusual. In biotech, lawsuits hover like background radiation. Patent disputes, intellectual property nonsense, subpoenas for testimony. It comes with the territory. I assumed it was something routine, something forgettable. I went downstairs without a second thought. The envelope was thick, manila, official. When I saw the seal of the Connecticut Superior Court, my stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor vanished beneath me. I knew that seal. My father, Gerald Ashford, a man who had spent tens of thousands of dollars legally proving I was not his daughter 10 years ago, was suing me for support. He was claiming indigence, failed investments, medical bills, declining health. And he was demanding that I, his biological child, pay $3,500 a month for his assisted living facility and ongoing expenses. I stood there in the lobby, long after the process server walked away, gripping that envelope like it might dissolve if I loosened my fingers. The audacity was breathtaking. To understand how obscene this lawsuit was, you have to understand Gerald. You have to understand that he was never a father. He was a portfolio manager, and I was always just an underperforming asset. I grew up in Darien, Connecticut, in a house that felt more like a showroom than a home. Everything was pristine. Everything was expensive. Everything existed to impress people who didn't live there. The furniture wasn't meant to be sat on. The art wasn't meant to be touched. And my father wasn't meant to be disappointed. My mother died when I was 6. Cancer. Fast, brutal. 1 month she was reading me bedtime stories and making hot chocolate. The next I was standing in a black dress, confused about why my mother was being lowered into the ground. Gerald explained death to me like a transaction. No comfort, no softness, just facts. Then we moved on. I cried for weeks. In bathrooms, in bed, in silence. And Gerald's response was irritation. He told me crying was pointless, that it wouldn't change anything, that I needed to toughen up. I was 6. After that, it was just the two of us. A little girl and a man obsessed with bloodlines, pedigree, and legacy. If I slipped, I was defective. If I failed, I was a poor investment. Love was conditional, and the conditions were never written down. I learned to perform competence early. I learned to hide everything else. The real fracture came when I was 24, when my grandfather died, and my father finally showed me exactly who he was. And now 10 years later, that same man wanted me to pay for his survival. I folded the court papers carefully. I already knew this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a reckoning. To understand why Gerald's lawsuit felt less like a legal claim and more like an insult carved into bone, you have to understand how he raised me. After my mother died, the house didn't just get quieter. It hardened. The silence wasn't empty, it was judgmental. It pressed in on you. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every mistake felt amplified, as if the walls themselves were taking notes. Gerald ran our home the same way he ran his finances, with spreadsheets in his head and expectations that were never discussed, only enforced. He didn't hit me. He didn't scream. That would have required emotion. Instead, he measured. If I brought home a report card with straight A's, he would nod once and say, as expected. If one grade slipped to a B, he would stare at it for a long moment, then look at me like I'd shown him a crack in a load-bearing wall. This is inefficient, he'd say. We'll need to correct it. As if my performance reflected on him like a quarterly return. My childhood bedroom looked perfect. Coordinated furniture, neutral colors, not a single thing out of place. But it never felt like mine. It felt like a hotel room designed by someone who didn't know any children. I learned early that mess meant failure. Noise meant weakness. Emotion meant liability. Grief was the first thing Gerald taught me to suppress. I remember crying quietly one night, curled under my blanket, missing my mother so badly it felt like my chest might collapse in on itself. Gerald opened my door without knocking. He stood there in the dark, his silhouette sharp and unmoving. "You're still doing this," he said. I wiped my face quickly, embarrassed, ashamed. "I miss her," I whispered. "She's dead," he replied flatly. "Crying won't resurrect her. You need to learn to regulate yourself." Regulate yourself? That phrase followed me for years. Every time I felt scared, or sad, or overwhelmed, I heard his voice in my head, cool and dismissive. By the time I was 10, I'd learned how to cry without making a sound. By 12, I'd learned not to cry at all. The only warmth in my childhood came from my grandfather, Gerald's father. He was everything Gerald wasn't. Where Gerald evaluated, my grandfather encouraged. Where Gerald criticized, my grandfather listened. He took me fishing. He asked about my interests. He told me he was proud of me, not because I was impressive, but because I was me. When Gerald spoke about family, it was always in terms of lineage, blood, legacy. He spoke about genetics, like some people talk about racehorses, good stock, bad stock, wasted potential. I didn't understand it then, but I felt it. The way he watched me. The way his approval was never fully given, only temporarily leased. I was something he owned, not someone he loved. By the time I was in my 20s, I thought I had learned how to survive him. I kept my head down. I performed. I excelled academically. I stayed out of trouble. I believed naively that if I did everything right, the ledger would finally balance. I didn't know yet that Gerald was never keeping score for my benefit. He was waiting for the moment he could erase me entirely. And that moment came the week after my grandfather was buried. My grandfather's funeral was small, quiet, and heavy with things left unsaid. Old money knows how to mourn discreetly. No hysterics, no public collapse. Just dark suits, careful condolences, and conversations about endowments whispered near the back of the room. I stood there listening to men talk about my grandfather's legacy, like it was an abstract concept, not the man who had taught me how to bait a hook and told me my curiosity was a gift, not a flaw. Gerald didn't cry. He barely spoke. He shook hands, accepted sympathy, nodded at the right moments. He looked like a man already reorganizing his future in his head. A week later, he summoned me to his study. The study smelled like leather and polish and something faintly metallic. The books lining the walls were pristine, untouched spines chosen for appearance rather than use. Gerald sat behind his desk shuffling papers, not looking at me when I entered. "We need to discuss the trust," he said. I blinked. What trust? He finally looked up then. His eyes were sharp, focused. My father's trust. I had learned about it the day after the funeral when the estate attorney called me directly. A generation-skipping trust, designed to pass assets directly to a grandchild. Me. It wasn't just substantial, it was life-altering. "I don't see what there is to discuss," I said carefully. "Grandpa wanted me to have it." Gerald's jaw tightened. He stood slowly the way he always did when he wanted to loom without appearing aggressive. He walked around the desk and stopped in front of me close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive, controlled, impersonal. "You're not going to accept it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He set it up specifically for me. That was when his expression changed. Not anger, calculation. "If you don't," he said quietly, "I will destroy your mother's memory." He turned, went back to his desk, and slid a manila folder toward me. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Photographs spilled out. Grainy, long lens shots, dated from the year before I was born. My mother, with another man, embracing, kissing. The air left the room. "She was unfaithful," Gerald said calmly. "I've known for years." I couldn't breathe. "You're lying." "You aren't my biological daughter," he continued, his voice clinical. "You're the result of her affair with her tennis instructor. I raised you out of obligation, out of respect for vows she broke." My vision tunneled. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him. "If you claim that trust," he said, "I will file a paternity lawsuit. I will make this public. Every paper in New England will carry the story. Everyone who ever respected her will know what kind of woman she really was." I tasted bile. My mother was the only person who had ever loved me, without conditions. The thought of her name being dragged through tabloids posthumously made my knees weak. I realized something then. This wasn't about truth. It wasn't about justice. It was about leverage. "Fine," I whispered. "Keep the money." But Gerald wasn't done. He wanted armor. His lawyers prepared an affidavit, a sworn statement signed under penalty of perjury declaring that he had reason to believe I was not his biological child and that all familial and legal ties were severed. In exchange, he promised not to sue the estate. I signed every page. I signed away millions. I signed away my last tie to family. That night, I packed a single bag, got in my car, and drove away from Darien without looking back. I didn't know it yet, but that affidavit would be the weapon that would destroy him. I arrived in Boston with one suitcase, a graduate degree, and a bank account that looked like it was holding its breath. I slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. The radiator clanged at night, like it was trying to escape the wall. I worked whatever jobs would take me. Cleaning offices after midnight, early morning shifts at a coffee shop where my hands smelled like burnt espresso and disinfectant. I ate ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, whatever was cheap. There were nights I sat on the edge of that mattress and wondered if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. I could have fought Gerald. I could have taken him to court. I could have exposed the lie. But every time I imagined it, I saw his face across a courtroom, heard his voice, felt his shadow stretch back over my life. Freedom mattered more than money. So I built something new, piece by piece. I poured myself into work. Genomics. Long hours in the lab. Weekends buried in research papers. I stayed late when everyone else left. I volunteered for projects nobody wanted. Slowly, people noticed. I earned my way forward. 3 years after I left Connecticut, I met Daniel Mercer at a conference. He was presenting research on gene regulation, brilliant, dryly funny, unassuming. Our first date was coffee that turned into dinner, then walking through the city until 2 a.m, talking about everything except money. He didn't care where I came from. He cared where I was going. We built a life that felt real, grounded, quietly strong. About a year after leaving home, I bought a commercial DNA test. Not for ancestry, for truth. When the results came back, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the screen. The match was undeniable. Gerald was my biological father. He had lied. About my mother. About me. About everything. Rage burned through me, but I didn't go back. I printed the results, locked them away, and chose silence. I let him keep his stolen fortune. I thought that would be the end. I was wrong, because Gerald lost everything. Bad investments. Bad judgment. The illusion of competence evaporated without his father's safety net, and when he hit bottom, he remembered me. 10 years later, he used the law like a crowbar, and that's when I hired Meredith Hale. She listened to my story without flinching. When I slid the old affidavit across her desk, she smiled. "Oh," she said softly, "this is going to be fun." Meredith Hale didn't raise her voice when she spoke. She didn't need to. Her office was all glass and steel perched high above downtown Boston, the kind of place designed to make clients feel small and adversaries feel exposed. She wore dark practical suits and shoes that looked like she could walk straight out of a deposition and into a fight without changing pace. She read the affidavit slowly. Once, then again. This, she said, tapping the paper, is a masterpiece of self-destruction. Gerald's lawsuit was filed under Connecticut's filial responsibility statutes, ancient laws that almost no one knows exist until someone weaponizes them. The argument was simple: biological parent indigent, entitled to support. The hypocrisy was almost elegant. "He spent 10 years denying you were his daughter," Meredith said, "and now he wants to collect like he never signed his soul away." She started building the strategy immediately. Judicial estoppel, sworn statements, consistency of legal position. "This isn't just a defense," she told me. "It's a trap." And he walked into it. The court date was set for November. Gray sky, bare trees, cold that settled into your bones. I wore my best navy suit, the one I'd bought after my first major promotion. Not flashy, just solid. Proof of survival. Gerald arrived in a wheelchair. He looked smaller, thinner, but the entitlement was still there, clinging to him like an old habit. His lawyer painted him as a victim, a devoted father, a man betrayed by an ungrateful daughter. Then Meredith stood. She didn't use the podium. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder and spoke calmly. "Your Honor, this man has already told a court that my client is not his child." The room froze. When she produced the affidavit, Gerald's face drained of color. "This," Meredith continued, "is not a father seeking support. This is a man attempting to profit from whichever lie benefits him most." The judge read the document in silence. The gavel fell hard. Case dismissed, with prejudice. Sanctions imposed. In the eyes of the court, Gerald Ashford had no daughter. I didn't look back as I walked out. My phone buzzed moments later. "You can't do this to me," the text read. "I'm your father." I typed one sentence. "According to your affidavit, I'm not." Then I blocked the number. The sound of the gavel didn't echo the way I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was blunt, final, like a door being shut without ceremony. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his expression carved from pure disapproval. "The petition is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiff is judicially estopped from asserting paternity for financial gain after previously denying that same paternity for the same purpose." Gerald tried to speak. He lifted a trembling hand from the arm of his wheelchair, his voice cracking. But I raised her. I fed her. I put a roof over her head. That has to mean something. It means nothing, the judge replied sharply, because you sold that right. Silence swallowed the courtroom. Meredith didn't smile. She didn't need to. The victory spoke for itself. Judge Morrison continued, his tone colder now. Furthermore, the court finds this action frivolous and abusive. The plaintiff is ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the defendant. Gerald's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. And the judge added, I strongly advise counsel to remove your client from my courtroom before I refer this matter to the district attorney for review of potential perjury. That was it. 10 years of lies collapsed in under 5 minutes. I stood slowly. My legs felt unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone else. Meredith squeezed my shoulder once, a quiet signal that it was over. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Gerald behind me shouting at his lawyer, demanding appeals, threats, spilling out like coins from a torn pocket. None of it followed me outside. The cold November air hit my face sharp and clean. I breathed deeply. It tasted like relief. My phone buzzed again. You owe me, the message said. You always have. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed carefully. According to the court and your affidavit, I don't. Send block. The story didn't end in that courtroom. It couldn't. Gerald didn't just lose a case, he exposed himself. Court transcripts are public record in Connecticut. Within days, word started circulating through the tight, polished circles Gerald had spent his entire life trying to impress. Old money communities run on reputation the way engines run on oil, and nothing spreads faster than the scent of fraud. People learned that Gerald Ashford had sworn under oath that his own daughter wasn't his child to steal an inheritance. They learned he'd later reversed that lie to demand money from the same daughter he'd legally erased. They learned he'd committed perjury, weaponized grief, and treated family like a balance sheet. Phones stopped ringing. Invitations dried up. The country club he'd belonged to for decades revoked his membership, quietly citing ethical concerns. Former friends stopped returning messages. Former partners began revisiting old deals with new suspicion. 2 weeks after the trial, one of his last remaining investment partners filed a civil suit accusing him of misrepresenting assets years earlier. Discovery unearthed emails. Those emails made their way to the state attorney general's office. Gerald was moved into a state-run care facility. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, meals on plastic trays, government assistance, the very safety net he'd sneered at his whole life. 3 months later, Meredith called me. Sanctions cleared, she said. They liquidated his remaining account. You're getting a check. It was $22,000. Not justice, not restitution, but enough. I kept what covered my legal costs and donated the rest to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, kids building lives without inheritance or safety nets. It felt right. Then a package arrived. No note, just a return address from a lawyer handling Gerald's affairs. Inside was a box of things he'd been forced to give up: papers, keepsakes, fragments of a life collapsing. At the bottom was a photo album. I opened it slowly. Pictures of me as a child, learning to ride a bike, holding a science fair ribbon, smiling in graduation caps. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if maybe he'd cared after all. Then I flipped one photo over. In Gerald's handwriting, investment cost to date, $42,000. ROI pending. Every photo was the same. Numbers, calculations, performance notes. Not memories. Receipts. That night, I built a fire and fed the album into it, one page at a time, watching the images curl and disappear. 6 months later, I was promoted to head of my department. My name appeared in industry newsletters, then in publications. For the first time, I was visible for the right reasons. A week after that, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Gerald. 3 pages of accusation. I'd stolen his legacy, ruined his name, abandoned him when he needed me most. He demanded a visit, an apology, acknowledgement of everything he'd sacrificed to raise me. At the bottom, written hard and heavy, "You owe me, I made you." I read it once, then again. Then I opened my files and took out the DNA results I'd kept all those years. I made 3 copies. One went to the attorney handling his affairs. One went to the district attorney's office. The third stayed with me. I folded Gerald's letter neatly and mailed it back with a single note attached. Per your 2014 affidavit, I am not your daughter. Please direct all future correspondence to the appropriate party. I never heard from him again. And for the first time in my life, silence felt like peace.